Hey everybody, it's Niko here from Redox. Really excited to share with you our recent developments on FHIR and answer all of your questions you have about how and if you can use us for that. So if we go to the next slide, we'll do a quick round of intros and then hop into the content. So my name is Niko Skievaski. I'm one of the co-founders and president of the company. You can find me on Twitter there at Nikoski. But I'll be kind of talking through some of the high-level pieces of it. And then I'm joined by Nick here.
I'm Nick, employee number 2 at Redox. My unofficial title's Standards Whisperer. So I've done a lot of work on the development side of the FHIR project.
Cool, and super excited to be chatting here with Nick today. So our team is distributed at Redox, so you might know that. So I'm based out of Madison, Wisconsin, where we have kind of our main office. And then Nick's out in Pennsylvania, hanging out in his home office. So yeah, but today we'll do a quick overview of what Redox is to give it some context for the FHIR discussion, and then we'll overlay that with FHIR, kind of an overview of what's going on with FHIR in the world, and then kind of mix them together and bring in what is our UpCare at FHIR, as we're calling it, how does that work, and then of course we'll take your questions. So there's a ask a question link at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to throw questions in there. There's already a couple of questions, so vote up and down the ones you want, and we'll go from the top, the highest voted questions first. So that's how we'll moderate it today. But I want to start with a quick bit of context around Redox. We like to look at this diagram as describing kind of why we do what we do. So healthcare happens at that intersection of patients and providers, and that relationship should be one of empathy, and technology is really just there to support that empathetic relationship. So in the ideal world, we would see that empathetic relationship supported by an efficient workflow from providers. So a lot of providers talk about how technology should make them more efficient. On the patient side, we should see technology actually bring empowerment to them, bring engagement in their care, in their care plans, and their medication adherence, and all of those worlds. So this is kind of the relationships that we see technology playing in the healthcare space. But so too often, the status quo of this is a relationship where, go to the next slide there, Nick, where we kind of see the opposite of that. So instead of technology providing efficiency, we're seeing it provide inefficiency to healthcare providers. You can't really meet a healthcare provider who raves about their EHR, right? You often hear them complain about the inefficiencies that it's caused. Same on the patient side, the lack of information that they receive and the context of that information can often draw fear and apathy in their healthcare experiences. And then because of the high throughput that our healthcare system demands, that relationship, instead of being one of empathy, can typically turn into one of commodity, where providers have to see patients on a very fast schedule, and patients feel like they're moving through an assembly line. So this is what really kind of, when it comes down to it, what Redox is all about. We're trying to enable technologies to combat this. And if we go to the next diagram here, this is really where we see ourselves, is below the line here. We are that technology infrastructure to help all the different applications and software that's being developed on the top of that line, create efficiency, create empowerment within the healthcare experience, create ultimately better healthcare for patients. So that's kind of defines the mode that we see ourselves in at Redox. Anything that applications have to do over and over again in the healthcare space, anything that a healthcare software developer has to be doing, that's where we see our purview. And a lot of the context around why we are adopting FHIR is because we saw that as something that people were writing applications towards. They were trying to adopt FHIR, but having a challenge when they got to the healthcare providers that they actually ultimately sold to, or as a healthcare provider, looking at applications who could actually interact with that API. So we're going to get a lot more into that. But some quick background here. Redox right now, we're sitting in the middle of a network of applications on the left-hand side and health systems on the right-hand side. So we have about 500 software applications that have been written to our API specification. And they do that so they can exchange data with any health systems that they sell to. And so we've grown that network on the health system side to nearing 250 health systems. So we pulled out some of the top logos here, people you might recognize, but really it runs the gamut from very large independent delivery networks to ACOs to all the way down to specialty hospitals and clinics and small provider practices. So it's really a spectrum. And really, yeah, so Redox, in a nutshell, we kind of bucket it in these 3 buckets. For the integration as a service, really. We have a managed service around our product, so we help applications and health systems out with the strategy, project management, their integration, scope of work, mapping the data into the API, so it can become usable for any application that a health system might want to interact with. Our product itself is our engine, and it has a state-of-the-art API structure out of the box that was developed from input from various health systems and applications as they're looking to integrate, and then a service around monitoring and support. So we watch this thing 24/7, so when something happens at 4 a.m., we're the ones who get paged and get up in the morning to fix it. We can go to the next one. I'll give you the signal here, Nick, this one. So we have a fundamentally developer-first approach to the way we create APIs. We like to think of it as an outside-in approach. So we take input from developers, from the workflows that developers are trying to create, and we create the API to meet those workflows. So on the health system side and the EHRs, they may expose data in all different sorts of ways based on kind of an inside-out approach of this is what data we have, how do we give it to the world? So that might take the form of your traditional HL7 v2, kind of legacy interfaces there. Some EHRs are putting FHIR out, so we saw a few questions on what differs from our FHIR versus EHR versions of FHIR. We actually work with a lot of those today, and we standardize those as well. We work with TDAs and TCDs, the kind of the V3 specs, and then getting into the X12 world and beyond. So we're standardizing all of those into a consistent API over one endpoint, and that allows you to code once and connect to any health system in EHR. Nice. On the health system side, it's similar. We work directly with health systems to modernize their API infrastructure. We can take interfaces or ETLs or it's legacy interfaces coming out of legacy interface engines, and we standardize those through our modern and allows a health system to really open up an application and interact with that, regardless of the functionality of their local EHR or any development that their team might otherwise need to do. I like this signal that we're playing here. We may have missed it. There we go. So I touched on this a little bit, but our team is really we've done integrations at nearing 250 health systems to support all of these applications. All of the apps that we integrate are cloud-based modern applications, so we're maintaining connections over that VPN, typically VPNs into health systems. If it's kind of V2 that we're setting up, we're maintaining API connections to other types of EHR. We're mapping all of that data through. We have our support around that to ensure that if anything goes wrong, if there's an error, if a connection goes down, if the connection is incorrect, we're the ones who get paged and fix it. Because the whole idea here is that when you connect to Redox, we're really using that connection across the entire network for any application that could be utilizing those services. And the big differentiator with Redox compared to any other integration strategy is this networked approach to integration. So any health system that's already connected to Redox is fair game. And what that means is that when you connect into our API, any of those health organizations are technically already connected, and we just on the flip of the switch. So over time, as we build this network out, the main idea is that the actual costs of integration should shrink for the entire ecosystem. And so we see this as a fundamental missing piece of infrastructure. It grows and becomes cheaper and more efficient for everyone to integrate. So that integration then eventually becomes a commodity. It's not people are using to differentiate the products, but really table stakes. That's the world we're trying to build towards. And this network approach of doing it is quite unique in that there's not many other people you can find that actually have a single point of connection, a single engine that will connect out to hundreds of applications and hundreds of health systems through that endpoint. So that's what we're really excited to enable with FHIR. Our FHIR implementation is something that's immediately available across all of these endpoints because we've mapped our API into that. So I'm going to let Nick run through kind of the state of the standard of FHIR, and then we'll hop into what Redox is doing with that. So I'll go on mute so I can drink my kombucha in peace.
Okay, guys, this is Nick in case you joined late. Kind of going to walk you through how we look at standards and how we think about FHIR. I think it's sometimes tempting to think that FHIR is this silver bullet that's going to solve all the world's interoperability problems. But really, it's nothing new. It's the same thing HL7's been doing for 30 years. And a lot of the connections we leverage right now use those standards from 30 years ago. The way it works is that there's the standards development process that HL7 has. Reasonably well-informed people debate sort of what FHIR should look like. They write it up. They test and refine sort of things as maybe they say, hey, this just isn't working. Let's change it up. And then that turns into an artifact. So this is commonly, a big bunch of PDFs. With FHIR, it's nice. It's like a web page, so you can actually just go to it from any computer. And STU3 is the version that FHIR is on right now. We're voting on STU4 over the summer, and it should be published in the fall. So once that's actually written, though, this is where a lot of the complexity and sort of the need for Redox comes in. The people who actually own the data have to go out and implement FHIR. So what that really means is that you get different flavors of it. And so far, we've sort of seen this in the wild, but time will tell if they really go to the very extremes and sort of make completely different products, or if it's relatively usable, but still it's very different. When those actually get deployed, they're also getting deployed to different health systems across the country. So you need to go out and connect to each different one. Manage a different set of credentials for each, work with their security teams and sort of get everything squared away. And finally, they might have additional things they put on top of it. I was at Dev for Health in Cleveland last week and heard about Cleveland Clinic doing a lot of custom stuff just to sort of bring their Epic instance up to speed. So you might have to deal with some local quirks too. And that's you at the very bottom. After all these steps, you'll finally be able to use sort of that one thing that was authored by HL7 after it filters through all these different channels. The next couple slides are going to show sort of a FHIR concept called maturity levels. And this is really the reason it took us so long to do FHIR. We're really involved in HL7. One of my teammates, Benjamin's a co-chair for the CDA work group. And really, the FHIR people are very upfront about sort of the maturity of it. This scale sort of represents how they think about when a resource becomes sort of stable enough or well-tested enough to use in production. And that's sort of the level 5 and 6. And so this fall, we should see the first two resources, patient and observation, become that level 5 normative, level 6 normative. So here's what FHIR looks like today. Huge scope. The reality is that most EHRs, they're not going to support everything. Now, I'm going to go through a couple EHR vendors sort of support here. A lot of people got out ahead of this thing called Project Argonaut and sort of implemented FHIR resources for a handful of fields. So you can see Cerner, it's on version 2 still, which is sort of like 2015 era FHIR. It's 2018 now, and somebody's gonna have to bring these up to date. There are substantial changes between them. Epic, pretty similar to what Cerner does. Again, just that Project Argonaut spec, and Allscripts, maybe even a little fewer resources. But the big picture is that there's not a lot of functionality that's going to be available if you go to an EHR today. It's going to be read only, and so we're kind of doing a different paradigm. We take the spec, we figure out whatever needs to could be mapped to sort of make it work, and we make it available to everyone. So this is the exact same way that our API works today, where we could say take a proprietary API like Athena or an HL7 version 2 message and give you one consistent experience. We're just sort of translating it into FHIR now. And Niko, I think you wanted to talk about this slide.
So these are differentiators with the way that we support FHIR in comparison to a lot of EHR vendors or custom implementations. So first off, Bi-Directional Exchange. So we are actually not only able to push data to you via the FHIR kind of bundle format, but also send the EHR. And that's regardless of the EHR's FHIR capabilities themselves. And the reason that is because we're actually translating it into whatever specification they need. So we'll translate a FHIR message that is posted to us into a V2 message, for instance. So that kind of covers that bi-directional and EHR agnostic. The other aspects that are quite different here is that our UpCare FHIR specification will be consistent across any EHR implementation. So what that means is you only have to build to it once. What we've seen in the world with the different implementations of FHIR is that because of the optionality in the specification that Nick went through, that's kind of built into the way that these standards are developed, is that these different implementations of FHIR take their own liberties in customizing it based on the extensions that they want to employ, as well as the actual content within their system will differentiate messages as well. And then, of course, our 24/7 support around it, kind of the typical Redox wraparound that you get with us monitoring all the data and all the feeds 24/7. So the health system and your application teams don't really have to do that. We're the ones who are supporting that on a 24/7 basis. And then security, we're taking precaution from a security aspect. We're high trust certified, SOC 2 Type 2. So we do all of the bells and whistles there. But beyond that, it's really consolidating the amount of potential kind of openings that a health system would necessarily need to have. So we're plugged into health systems with 20 different applications that would otherwise have been 20 different connections into that health system, doing that over one connection. So really minimizing the actual kind of surface area of vulnerability from a security aspect. So just some of the differentiators in the way that we deploy FHIR and some of the kind of bells and whistles there.
Cool. So just to talk through a couple scenarios where this might be useful to you or a project you've been thinking about, how would I solve this? Sort of the classic example of the thing Redox does is take HL7 version 2, which again is like the two versions before FHIR. And we set up a VPN to the health system, which is sort of the industry standard way to exchange these types of messages. We take on that translation, turn it into FHIR for you, and you can consume that on a HTTP endpoint. So we're utilizing a paradigm of FHIR called messaging. So instead of it being sort of the RESTful API, everything that you need is packaged up in what's called a bundle. So it's another kind of FHIR resource. And so, for example, if you're getting a patient discharge event, you'll need to know not just the patient, but the visit, maybe their insurance, discharge instructions, things like that. So we sort of package that all up to you in one request instead of you having to go out and query for it. We've got some animations. A second use case we have that a lot of people take advantage of is polling. So this comes up especially with EHR vendors who only have APIs. Sometimes it's nice to have event-based stuff, or maybe they have sort of a proprietary webhook implementation that you don't necessarily want to go out and code for. What we've done is built out those webhooks and those polling type systems for a bunch of different EHRs, and we're still building them, for smaller and smaller ones. But we can basically go out, see what's different, sort of do this deduplication, and go out and grab all the things you need, and send it back to you on the same API. So HL7 version 2 is event-based. We can sort of turn non-event-based things into event-based things. And then on the other end, of course, it's FHIR. So number 2, just a generalized version of this is sort of those API vendors who only offer web services. We can just go out straight to it, do our query, come back with, maybe they have a proprietary JSON format or an XML format. Again, package it up into a bundle for you and give you FHIR back. And then EHRs with FHIR, that's great. We have a handful of connections with FHIR. Again, these might be read-only ones, so we can do things for you where, let's say you care about a whole bunch of things, not just like a patient's problem list, but say their lab results and their vaccinations too. So we can go out, make a request to them, and get everything that you need, and send it back to you as a FHIR bundle. So you can kind of get this normalized interface across EHRs. Sort of the authentication and connectivity is managed for you, and you don't have to sort of go out and figure out how to make all these different requests and stitch them together. We sort of have that logic built for you. So we go out and grab all the different pieces, assemble them for you. So Redox FHIR is live. You can go to our documentations, developer.redoxengine.com. Patient admin and scheduling are the first ones we've done. We've actually been using this in production for almost 2 years. We have a product called Data Chateau that actually just stores everything as FHIR. So these translations are pretty well tested internally, and we're sort of just releasing them to everybody. On our docs, you can just toggle between the FHIR documentation and the Redox documentation. This is live today. And then if you have an account already, it's a free account. Anybody can sign up. You can start playing with this, start sending messages to yourself. This is behind a feature flag right now, so if you're an existing Redox customer, we're happy to turn it on for you, and we'll release it to everybody in the next week or so. It's as simple as toggling the communication method on your destination or source to Redox FHIR. So Niko, did you want to take this one? Can't hear you. All right, I'll jump in for Niko. So if you want to use FHIR today, in the real world, Redox is a great option. It's as simple as that toggle. It just starts the translation for you. Part of the Redox process is normalizing and cleaning all that data in the middle. So it's already clean. It's already mapped to these sort of code sets we want. If you don't want to wait for EHR vendors to support it, or sort of what they're supporting is outside of what you need, again, those read-only resources, maybe you need to write something back in. We can help with that. And if you want a consistent FHIR experience, again, maybe you're going to go out and check out the specs of 2 different EHR vendors and see that the FHIR interface is pretty different across them. That's something we normalize on our engine. And again, for the health system people in the room, or people who are using maybe Mirth to deal with HL7 version 2 or any kind of interface engine, we have really state-of-the-art tools that I'm really proud of to sort of take those and really efficiently convert them to FHIR. So again, the messaging-based paradigm is sort of the FHIR way of doing HL7 version 2 or upgrading that to FHIR, and we're sort of on the cutting edge of that. So really excited about that.
So I think I worked out my technical difficulties and I became the Redox user here, but Nick covered the points. Really the main thing that I wanted to cover. So if you're at a health system, we've had a lot of requests from the health systems that we work with that actually want to stand up FHIR APIs. And we can essentially do that by modernizing any of the legacy infrastructure to make that happen. So definitely something that I'm super excited to talk with various health systems about. But yeah, we can hop into questions now. We've got a bunch down here, so let's just start at the top. So let's see. The first one is, will our FHIR allow us to write back into the EHR, including the use case where the EHR does not yet support writing via FHIR natively? Nick, do you want to take that?
Sure. So the answer is yes. Any Redox data model is bidirectional by nature. The thing about EHR sort of implementing FHIR is that it's very easy to do as a read-only operation. But anybody who has worked with a database that's sort of, you're adding a new API or a new API version, it's pretty, you want to be pretty careful, like allowing people to write data back into it. So in the patient admin example, let's say you want to create a new patient with FHIR. If the EHR doesn't support that, we'll sort of turn it into whatever they need. If it's like a proprietary web service, or if it's HL7 version 2 to create the new patient, we can do that. The answer is yes, as long as it's a Redox data model.
Nice. Okay, next question here. Do you have a standard method for converting XML-based CCD messages to a FHIR equivalent?
Sure, yes. The answer is yes. My wonderful coworker, Benjamin, I mentioned he's the CDA co-chair. So he sort of figured all that out. It's part of that internal data chateau project I mentioned. And in terms of the Redox FHIR roadmap, that one will probably be next because that logic already exists. That's our Redox clinical summary data model. So again, that will be a bundle, a FHIR document. It's just sort of another paradigm like messaging and the RESTful API. But yeah, we sort of do that already in production, and it will be coming up on the roadmap for Redox FHIR.
Nice. Okay. So what does the standard implementation workflow look like between developer, Redox, and healthcare organization? So Nick, you want to take the developer and Redox side, and then I'll take the Redox and healthcare org side?
Sure. So the way we envision it working is, you can sign up for a dev account anytime. It's totally free. You can build out sort of the Redox model connection. We do webhooks. We do sort of this OAuth-like authentication for the other end if you want to send stuff back in. And you could get that all set up and tested. And then once the development side is done, we have an implementation team, and Niko can explain a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, so essentially what we do is we'll work with your application development team to understand the workflow. Based on your workflow, there's a certain set of APIs that you would use from Redox. What we do at Redox is we understand how those APIs translate to the preferred method of integrating at each EHR vendor, and typically what health systems who use those EHRs prefer. So for instance, if you're using the patient admin bundle of FHIR messages, we know that typically will translate for a legacy EHR like a Cerner or an Epic. That'll translate down into HL7 V2 ADT message. So we'll actually be the ones who scope out the health system side of the integration. And that's something that we deliver to you as you're selling to those organizations. So you can walk into that health system who's using Epic and say, this is what my integration looks like. It's built out in both a scope that they'll understand as well as a project plan that is reasonable from their perspective. So we'll take the lead on working directly with the health system's IT team to get the right interfaces provisioned or split to our endpoint. We'll do all the work of mapping that into our API that can be exposed via FHIR, and then your experience will be consistent on the developer side. So with healthcare organizations, that's how we would stand up a new healthcare organization that's not already on the network. It's something that we add about 3 to 5 every week these days, and we're standing up different interfaces at new healthcare organizations. If you're working with a healthcare organization that's already on the Redox network, even better. We already have connectivity there. We already have a number of interfaces. We likely already have many of the interfaces, the most common ones that are used. So it's a matter of doing a quick gap analysis and figuring out, based on the scope of your integration, what do we need to turn on at the health system, and then potentially running a project there to turn those things on. In the case when we already have those interfaces up and running at the health system, and you're already connected to Redox, we've seen go lives in as fast as the same day, where we hop on the phone with the health system, turn it on in staging. If everything looks good, we move into production, and then you're live. So that's the world we're trying to get to, and that's the efficiency gains of this networked approach, is that once we see more and more overlap like that, we can get to more of these kind of turnkey integrations. Cool. So next question here. Will the FHIR provide a richer subset of FHIR than Epic's open.epic FHIR API?
I could take this one. So as a former Epic employee, Epic developer on the interface team, I wouldn't really, characterize it as a richer experience. It's just a different paradigm than the way Epic's approaching FHIR. So they're sort of driven by potential meaningful use regulation. Again, the Argonaut project sort of was designed to build design regulation and design the specs that people would implement to be regulated. We're doing the messaging paradigm, which is different. So in some ways, Epic has developed the interfaces for 30 years using HL7 version 2. And we're sort of able to consume that and augment it so that, say, medications or something that would probably not come out of a push FHIR from Epic right away is something we could sort of map. Again, that's not to make any promises, but I would say it's not necessarily richer, but just sort of an augmentation of interfaces they support that are not FHIR.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Redox as a company, our product is this API platform, right? And so we listen to developers in order to figure out what APIs you need and what developer experience you're looking for, and that's the product that we sell. So we're very responsive to your needs, and we prioritize that accordingly with the needs that we're seeing across the industry. And it's just a very different kind of incentive structure compared to EHR vendors or the government potentially putting out regulations around who does what and those sorts of things. So that's how we've developed our APIs thus far. That's why we started with the subset of FHIR that we're currently supporting. And that's why we went straight to FHIR messaging, because we saw that as the most common type of integrations that were needed. And really the query-based FHIR functionality that was being put out by EHR vendors really didn't meet the needs of a lot of the integrations that at least we supported on the market. So that being said, one of our calls to action here is look over our documentation, understand what we're doing if it's something that's interesting to you, and let us know what you're looking for. If you really want different types of data exposed via FHIR resources, let us know, because we use that to prioritize what we're going to put out next. We're very early in this FHIR journey as far as us exposing FHIR via our APIs, and we started with our most commonly used interfaces and bundles that are useful for these developers. But the roadmap ahead is really yet to be determined based on the feedback we're going to get from you guys as you start using this stuff. So thanks for that. It's a good question. I think we have the next question that relates to this a little bit. So this is from Chad. Have there been thoughts about making our FHIR an app within, say, Cerner Smart program? There's also an Epic program now too. Let's see. A provider could turn on our FHIR and make it easier for others like them to get their apps up and running. So I can take a quick stab at this one. It's certainly something that we've talked with various EHR vendors about doing, something that we know would be really helpful for the ecosystem. One thing that we do not want to do kind of categorically is get in the way of the EHR vendors' business model. So a lot of them will stand up a business model around their application program. And so we work really closely with Athena on this, for instance. So if you do Athena's MVP program, you can use Redox APIs to integrate with Athena. Their business model is left standalone, and so is ours. There's different value propositions that the Athena MVP business model brings than the Redox integration solution. So we keep those separate. We try not to muddy the waters there because conflict could arise. But as much as we can do to simplify that process of getting up and running in these application programs is it's our goal to do that. So I can say we are definitely marching down that path and working on it. Nick, did you want to speak to that at all, or specifically address the smart kind of piece of it?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that we're sort of we're not doing this in a vacuum. We want to make this part of the HL7 process. So there's an Argonaut implementation guide. There's also going to be a Redox implementation guide. So if an EHR vendor really loved what we were doing, they would have all the tools necessary to sort of produce valid Redox FHIR moving forward. Same thing with Smart. We're going to support Smart for our SSO data model very soon, and we also want to. There's sort of a draft Smart backend services authorization framework that we want to use to sort of modernize our authentication to the API. So we definitely live in the standards world, and I think Niko's point about sort of how we integrate with EHR vendors depends a lot on how the EHR vendor runs their developer program. But
cool. So next question here. How do you charge for your services? That is a great question. So we charge based on the number of health systems that you're connecting to. So if you're an application developer, you're trying to deploy an app at many healthcare organizations, we charge based on the number of those organizations. And so there's a baseline platform fee that's kind of for the relationship for the services that are involved in just the one-to-one relationship with Redox. You get an account manager who helps kind of walk you through that process. And then for every single health system implementation you do, there's another licensing fee on top of that. So it's an annual license that's paid, and it depends a bit on your scope as well as your how many connections you're planning on doing. So we moved to a model where there's heavy volume discounting for larger organizations. We kept getting that request a lot. So it varies a bit, which is why I can't give out numbers because it does vary depending on how people are growing and what their scope of work looks like. So there's a button at the bottom of the screen that says that says to contact us. Click that if you're interested in learning more. We'll set up a quick call and hammer out those details and get you an actual price quote. But yeah, general pricing structure, platform fee that's annual, and then a fee per an annual license fee per connection that you're connecting to. Okay. Well, I think we have a lot of other questions in here that we'll be able to address asynchronously. So we'll type some comments in afterwards. But want to wrap it up and get you guys back to the rest of your day. So wanted to say thanks for coming out. I know this was a really fun announcement that we got to make. So thanks y'all for jumping in here. I know that the video was a little grainy, so we'll be posting the slides. We'll send those out to everyone who registered, as well as a copy of the video. We'll put that up on YouTube. And yeah, Nick, you want to add anything?
Around everybody, again, reach out if you have any more specific questions. We're happy to answer them.
Awesome. Yeah, and if you're looking to reach out to us, you can find us on our website, redoxengine.com, or that button at the bottom of the screen. And we'll hope to talk to you guys soon. Thanks.